I'm going to call this meeting back to order. We are going to reconvene back to open session. It is 6:37. Today is Thursday, January 27th, 2011. This is a regular meeting of the Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District Board of Education. And the first thing we will do is the Pledge of Allegiance. Joseph, would you like to lead us?
Absolutely. I pledge allegiance to
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And the first thing I will do is I've got a couple of readouts from closed session. The first is I need to report that in closed session, the Board of Education voted 5-0 to approve the recommendation of the Administrative Hearing Panel to expel student number 564236 for violation of California Education Code Section 48900, subsections B and K, from the schools in the Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District. The second one is that in closed session, the Board of Education voted 5-0 to approve the settlement agreement with the parents of student number 568242. The amount of the settlement was $22,000. Okay. The next thing I will do is we need to approve the agenda. So would someone like to move approval of tonight's agenda?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Okay, that carries. All right, moving on to item G. Board President announcements. I do have a few, so please bear with us. Regarding the 2010 and 11 kindergarten registration, orientation meetings for new kindergarten parents will be held on Monday, January 31st at Vista Grande Elementary School and Tuesday, February 1st at Dapplegray Elementary School. Both meetings will begin at 7:00 p.m. Parents are encouraged to attend one of these meetings to meet the district staff and principals, hear important enrollment information, and have an opportunity to ask questions. Regarding 2009 and 10 high school choice, all students entering 9th grade in fall 2011 must select their high school of attendance. Students may choose to attend either Palos Verdes High School or Palos Verdes Peninsula High School. Parents and students can make their selection by completing the high school choice application they received by mail and returning it to the Malaga Cove Administration Center by Friday, February 18th. To assist parents in making an informed choice, the high schools are conducting parent information nights. Palos Verdes Peninsula High School held an open house last night. Palos Verdes High School will hold its open house on Wednesday, February 2nd. For additional information, contact the counseling office at either high school. And finally, we have a student board member recognition we'd like to make. Our student board member, David Tang Kwan, has been selected as an Intel Science Talent Search finalist. Of the thousands of entries, David was selected as only one of 40 students nationwide to now go on and compete in the Intel Talent Search in Washington, D.C. in March. The Intel Science Talent Search is the oldest and most prestigious high school science research competition in the nation. David will now go to Washington to compete for over $600,000 in awards, with a top winner receiving $100,000. We wish him well in this very special accomplishment. He has been involved in science research in the medical field since his middle school years. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to item H, approval of the minutes. Let's take them one at a time. Minutes of the special meeting of November 17th. Would someone like to move approval?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. That carries. Minutes of the special meeting of November 18th. Would someone move approval?
Move approval.
Second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Okay, that carries. Minutes of the special meeting of November 30th.
I move approval.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Okay, minutes of the regular meeting of December 2nd.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Okay, and finally, minutes of the special meeting of January 6th. Someone like to move approval?
So moved.
Okay. Second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
That carries. Thank you. Okay, item I, report of the superintendent. Walker.
Okay, I'm taking credit for time I banked in prior meetings, and because this one's going to be a little longer tonight, so we'll start with that. I'd like to start with actually recognizing Mary Ross in the costume closet. They're close friends. I'm putting you up first, Mary. So they're obviously, we work closely with them. In fact, we share the space here at the Malaga Cove campus, so they're here tonight to make a presentation.
It's a privilege for the Costume Closet Board to be a part of the District Superintendent's report. As Walker said, I'm Mary Ross, Publicity Chair for the Costume Closet, and I bring greetings from Judy Lacer, who is the director who's unable to be here this evening. So thank you, District Superintendent Walker and school board members for having us at this meeting tonight. I'd like to take a moment to introduce those board members who are here. We have Sally Brown, who is our volunteer, one of the volunteer chairs, our floor manager, Peggy Warner, Arlene Groats, who's been our board secretary for numerous years, and Dick Groats, who is what I will say, jack of all trades. Whatever we need lots of muscle for, or whatever, photographs even, Dick will do this. So we appreciate that you're here, and we have other members who are not able to be here. I have a check to give you, but I'd like to give just a short history of our Palos Verdes costume closet. The PVP Council of PTA started the costume closet in 1977. At that time, we did have 3 high schools, and it was a way to enable the schools to borrow one another's costumes for their school plays. It was also thought that there might be benefits and profits that could be found and would fund the PTA Council. So after a few short years, we were able to meet both of these goals, and a few years after that, we started to give a sizable amount of money to all of our public schools. Now we've given over $500,000 to the schools via the PTA, school board, and principals. In addition, we've enriched many school programs with the district by giving them costumes for free or by giving our students half of the normal rate. For instance, every year our 5th graders in the district get costumes for half rental when they do their colonial days. Our 4th graders study California, and they get many of their costumes to enhance their program. Peninsula High Orchestra gets free tuxedos for their concerts. Now, we've made 4 moves to different school sites, and our final, or our last, and hopefully our final move is here at the Malaga Cove School and the auditorium. The funds that are being presented this evening are a result of our Save the Costume Closet, which began in 2003. Over 250 individuals, PTA units, and PEF contributed to these funds. Our agreement was that we would assist the school district with whatever renovating was to take place on the building. So in accordance with this agreement, I would like to be able to present you with the check, Walker.
Actually, we'll let
I'll take it. And Dora.
Dara will take the money.
I'm happy to present it to Dora. Thank you. This check is for $160,046. from Save the Costume Closet. And we want to thank the public who also are part of these, 250-some donors. Thank you.
Technically.
Thank you very much on behalf of the board. You all do a wonderful service to all of our students, and I know you work tirelessly, so thank you. And I think most of us have worked shifts in the costume closet before, so thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and the next one, the City of Rancho Palos Verdes charter election. On March 8th, the City of Rancho Palos Verdes will hold an election so voters can decide whether or not the city should become a charter city. In that regard, I've been asked several times about possible impact on the school district, if there is one. So I placed this item on the agenda so that I could report back and provide board members the opportunity to hear about Measure C and possibly if you had any questions about the matter. The initial analysis, is in, and it's probably not much of an impact on the school district, but we're still doing more research on the topic, and I can report back at a future meeting. So we have a couple of speakers here this evening that I think you all know well that have worked with the school district in the past that can provide some insight on Measure C. And I thought we would start with Ken Deitis here this evening. And Ken, if you can come to the podium, and the mic is yours.
Madam President, members of the board, thank you for giving me the opportunity to tell you about the RPV charter. And the big question is, why are we proposing the charter? Primarily to stop the Sacramento power grab. But first, I'd like to answer some of the issues that are being brought up. And one of them is why the urgency and why this last minute. The charter was first brought up in the year 2003. At that time, the in lieu funds that the state was distributing weren't being attacked as heavily. We had other priorities, and the number of large programs in our city did not make it an urgency. Since January of last year, the council set a tactical goal to look at a charter. There were several council meetings at which people gave testimony and it was heard and it was changed. The item was in the city newsletter. The front page of the local paper had a very large article, and PVP Watch itself had 3 articles in its newsletter. So to claim that there's been no notice or people aren't aware of it is really not true. But why the urgency? In January 2010, the legislatures announced that they would go after every local tax they can get to solve the mismanagement of their own finances. Early in that process, March 8th, as well as of 2011 and November of 2011 were considered. By midsummer, it became apparent that from the rhetoric in the election, things were going to move a lot more rapidly, and at that time, March was chosen. Sacramento looks to solve its budget problems due to fiscal mismanagement by transferring problems to local cities this legislative session. The governor announced plans for reallocation to the local government. Read that as we're going to move the programs we're doing to the local government, but not the funds. They're raiding RDA funds. They're raiding all the in lieu taxes, and they're proposing to raid all the local taxes. The state budget cycle is going to be in June, and I, for one, think that it's going to move more rapidly this year so they can solidify their position with respect to the taxes they will get. A charter will help the city offset and prevent all, if not most, of those projected local taxes that we so much depend on. As far as charter quality is concerned, it is not a function of the pages. In our charter, during the sessions before the council, a number of things were brought up to basically hold us to the city's founding principles. One of those was land use, and the other one was fiscal conservancy, which our general plan was the first one in the state to identify. And how does the charter provision provide these controls? There's a specific section in the charter that says the zoning will be consistent with our general plan. Charter cities usually are not required to do that. That's why it's in our charter. The council total compensation is going to be governed too. Everybody is concerned about what happened in Bell. Let me assure you that's the latest one. It's happened in other charter cities, and it has also happened in general law cities. It's not a function of the kind of government. Employee total compensation will be totally transparent, even better than what's being put out by the state right now. And the charter will continue to have a council manager form of government. Some of the assertions being made is that savings are not as some might predict. I submit that any tax saving is worth the effort. The tax savings from marketplace cost-effective value contracts can be significant, especially since we're looking now at larger public works problems than we did back many years ago. If you've been reading about the San Ramon Canyon problem and its $19 million impact, I think you can appreciate that. It also provides the ability to do a design build, which makes it much more cost-effective in the contracting. Some cities have saved millions. Will we? Only time will tell. This charter was designed to give 3 council members the power of ordinance. That is the hue and cry out there now. Right now, it only takes 3 votes to adopt an ordinance. in our city, even in a general law city. The charter city does not change that. Anyway, 3 of those members that they may be concerned about are being termed out. So they've got the opportunity to vote in 3 new members that they will have, hopefully, confidence in. Potential abuses by the council are not a function of the government. What it requires is an ethical council, city manager, city attorney, and staff. But most importantly, it requires an informed and involved electorate. Thank you very much.
Thank
Are
you.
there any questions?
Maybe we should
Have
hear from,
after this
yeah,
second
have
speaker.
Mr. Reeves speak, and then I think what I'll do is give you an opportunity, Mr. Dida, after Mr. Reeves speaks, to, if you want to say anything in response, and the same thing with Mr. Reeves for just a couple of minutes if you want,
Thank you.
and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you.
And I see Don in the back. If you can come forward. We're all familiar with Don. He's worked with the school district for many years also.
Good evening. Good to see all of you again. I heard you introduce me by, many of these people may not know me, but by way of introduction, I am the vice chair of the Citizens Oversight Committee for Measures R&S construction bonds, and I'm a 35-year resident of the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. I'm going to be honest with you. I want to apologize to the board because I do not think it was appropriate to invite you to get into the middle of this discussion on a city charter. Okay? In fact, I don't think this is the right forum to have that debate. There are going to be debates all over the city in the next month or so where we're all going to get to speak. So, with my apologies, I will continue and I'll try to make it brief. This is a 2-page city charter that's being proposed, and you may or may not know a city charter is actually a constitution. I belong to some social clubs with constitutions that are 5 times longer. If you haven't seen it, I'd be glad to share it with you, but I can tell you this started out as a 1-page charter until the charter city of Bell was outed, and now it's a 2-page charter. Now look, there are some very good things to say about charter cities. I think the investigation, evaluation of a charter is a good thing to do. The best ones have been done over a longer period than what we're talking about, and with all due respect, this evolved at a rapid enough pace that if you walk out on the street, in fact, if I took a poll of people in RPV that are here, my guess is most of them wouldn't even have heard about this. That's been my experience. The League of California Cities published a 6-page document that compares charter cities with, not common law, but general law cities. And it's very intricate. I mean, there are a lot of subjects here that require debate, discussion, et cetera, et cetera. There are issues that have not been addressed, and I'm just going to name a few of them. The control of election laws. The city, under a charter, has complete independent control of how you run your elections, who's qualified to run for election, et cetera, et cetera. You can have public financing of elections, bidding statute exemptions and assessment and taxation powers, including real property transfer taxes. That's just a few of them. Those things are all worth more discussion, and I will contend that if you have a good charter, it will have addressed those things in the charter. Now, the answer to that is, and I've heard it from officials at the city, it's a living, evolving document. Well, it's kind of like health care. I hate to mention it, but first you have to pass it, and then you can understand it. I prefer not to do that with my government. One of the issues is we're going to save a lot of money and we're going to share it. And You hear about the keystone of that is avoiding prevailing wages. You'll hear that a lot. Avoid prevailing wages, which implies unions and implies other things. Turns out, you haven't heard this. If there are state or federal monies involved, you will pay prevailing wages. Okay? Number two, I have an example from the city where they saved $2 million on a roughly $10 or $11 million project. I'll tell you why, in their words. We were, quote, fortunate to receive 3 bids from non-prevailing wage contractors. That sounds like a plan to me. In other words, the cities are flexible now. Now, there's one other thing going on, or 2 other things, actually. There are 2 lawsuits in the state of California right now. I'm not a lawyer, so don't ask me any lawyer questions. But the essence of those lawsuits is prevailing wages. And from what I read, and who knows, when you go in, you know better than I do, when you go into court, who knows what the answer is going to be. But the essence of that is all cities will pay prevailing wages. I think it's a terrible thing if it happens. That's kind of an oxymoron in my mind. But that may negate anything that might come up. I'll tell you that I will not speculate on what I think the real motive is for making RPV a charter city, the only one on the Hill. But I can tell you this, in all the discussions I've heard and been involved in, the benefit to the Palos Verdes Unified School District has not been one of them. I've talked to almost every one of you about the cities being more cooperative with the school district, interest in athletics and social facilities for our kids. Mine are all grown, but I got grandkids. But they can do that now. There's nothing stopping a city from helping, working with you. So if I were you, I'd ask the question, what have you done for us lately? And do a little scorecard on that. Is there any benefit to the school district? None that has been identified. Now you're looking into it more. I have not seen any. I guess I could wave my arms about a few, but I won't. And again, the cities are more than welcome to work with the school district. RPV is financially healthy. I think that's a great thing. I mean, by today's standards, RPV is well managed financially. No matter what whether I agree or disagree with the priorities, the bottom line is we're good. We have a budget about maybe 20-25% of the school district. In fact, being a little flip, maybe you could loan us some money.
Don't tell that to
Until
the
our
teacher.
next presentation.
That didn't go over well, did it? Right. But, you know, we have infrastructure issues. Ken mentioned that, and we do. And you know, issues could, should, would take every bit of discretionary spending that we have. So, bottom line, I think you're too wise to buy into pie-in-the-sky promises about what this is going to do for the school district. So my advice is stay out of the swamp, and if you happen to live in RPV, just say no to this charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. Ken, would you like to say anything in response, or, okay, just ask that you keep it brief.
What's being said reminds me of Chicken Little, the sky is falling, because they're predicting all sorts of dire consequences because they think that they have elected a city council, and they think that in the future they may elect one they can't trust. Well, whose fault is that if not theirs? A lot of the things they're predicting about the dire consequences that can happen are just that. They're also pie in the sky. I don't see any of those things really happening. We have fortunately in our city, a very active, a very involved community, and no council has ever gotten away with anything like that and will not in the future. So I don't see all the dire consequences that are there. Unfortunately, I think the school board at times has the same problem the city has. You start announcing things, you work on things for a long period of time, but until you ask the people to take some action, they are not aware of it. Then when you ask them to take action, they scream, "Oh, this is a railroad, you're going too fast. What's the urgency? You didn't communicate." It was said that we started out with a one-page charter. How do you think it got to be 2 pages? Because of input from the community in terms of those values that are long-lasting and should be in a charter, and that is the land use and some of those other issues I talked about earlier. There was ample opportunity. People just don't pay attention until the very last minute, and that's unfortunate and it's sad. They are paying attention now, and they will have both sides to look at. This was not meant to be a debate. It's rather a presentation of the facts on one side and the opinions on the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Don, anything to wrap up?
Thank you for your opinions. This has nothing to do with who you trust and who you don't trust. I mean, it's independent of who you elect. The issue is, if you want to have a charter, let's work our way through it. Let's nail it down. Let's make it as best we can. It probably even then won't be perfect, but it's certainly not perfect now. And the other thing about, well, trust but verify. I like that. There are a number of charter cities engaged in any number of lawsuits at this particular point in time. If you don't do it right, I mean, our city spends at least $1 million, I think it's over $1 million a year in legal fees out of a $20 million budget. Let's not double it. I mean, there are issues there that need to be addressed, and Ken mentioned, I guess, or somebody mentioned that PVP Watch. We post all this information on our website, and both sides have posted information on their website, so I can only encourage people to take a look, and we'll go from there. Thank you again.
Okay, thank you. Now we'll take some questions. If you'd like to hang on just a second, Don and Ken, for a minute to see if we have any questions from board members. So Walker, you're going to continue to
Yes.
investigate this, and a number of board members have been asking, given that there are other charter cities and school districts, and how what the interplay is, and so, of course, that's why we're curious. But thank you for the presentation. I think it helps us to understand what the issues are, and it's helpful for the public. Did you want
I just wanted to add, one thing on the to-do list, since we are, our jurisdiction involves 4 cities. And by the way, that fact sometimes gets moans when I'm with other school board members in California, that we have, four cities in our one district, and they assume it must be a population of 2 million. I said, no. How does that interplay? I don't know whether that has been, what's going to be the interplay with the other 3 cities. Having a charter city in 3 cities that aren't, with the umbrella of the school district. Are you going to answer my question? Yeah. Oh, cool. Thank you. Save Walker some time.
Be a charter city is not going to have any effect. We'll still cooperate with the other 3 cities. On the peninsula, we have regional sheriffs, we have JPIA, so all of that will continue, and it's not going to change anything but the internal workings of Rancho Palos Verdes.
But let me ask a question. I believe the charter charter cities are allowed to set some of their electoral policies and laws, if not in this charter, by an amended charter down the road, if it stays as a charter. And I'd be interested in understanding how that could potentially impact the school district.
Any amendment to the charter will have to go to the vote of the people, number one. And yes, some election processes can be changed. I'll give you an example of one that the city might have been faced with that would have been very difficult. In the last election, a very honored gentleman by the name of John McTaggart ran for office. He died the day later. Had he won, state law said we would have to appoint someone to either hold a special election at an excessive cost immediately within 60 days, or we would have to appoint someone for a full 4-year term. Now, a charter can say, no, what we'll do is we'll appoint someone until the next election to avoid the extra cost of the election and not have someone appointed for a full 4-year term.
So let me ask a question about that, just because I don't want to get a debate either. But
It can.
But the charter could say that, but the charter has to say that.
No.
Or is that done by 3
as
votes
far
of
as-
the?
As far as the changing that election, that can be done by 3 votes on the council, just like anything else takes 3 votes.
Well, and so that, I mean, the concern that I would like to understand is, we do have an area of the school district which has choices, and there's been some rhetoric out of the city in the past about what we should be doing about that area, and I just would like to make sure that I understand if there's any impact on our district, either with that area or with electoral laws, that we should understand about that could potentially be positive or negative, that if we understood that, we could then, when I'm not suggesting we take a position, but we would just let it be known what those effects are, if any, and maybe they're none. But I'd like to at least understand that.
I might. First of all, we have had open seats on our city council at various times for various reasons. Mr. Dida himself was recently appointed to fill the seat of Peter Gardner when he passed on. So the mechanism for filling that seat is there. The options are, like he said, you can have a special election, you can wait, or you can fill it in. Now, amongst the things you can do in the election area, you change the requirement for how many signatures you needed to put an initiative on the ballot. There are people who don't like initiatives, and the way to get around that is instead of 20% or 10%, depending on the condition.
But I'm primarily interested in what that has to do with the school district. So, I mean, if you could do that to get an initiative that would be on the ballot for a school district issue, then I'd be more interested than something just within the city itself.
Any other
I'd like to add one thing. The replacement for Peter Gardner was done within 30 days after the passing of his death to the end of his term as required by state law. But he died just before the end of his term, about 6 months before. So in that case, it was a simple matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you all for being here and helping to enlighten us, and we will continue to look at this matter. Thank you. Okay, Walker.
And are we ready? Give a second to bring this up, and then we'll...
Would you, David, Joseph, would you guys like to do your report and then leave? Or do you want to hear the budget presentation?
It's going to be like an hour.
Oh, an hour?
I would think. At least be an hour.
Oh, that's
give your
fine, that
report?
works.
Lights up.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna, and then you can stay for as much as you want.
Okay, if there's no objection from the board, we're going to just bring up one item before the budget update because we have students here who potentially have homework they have to get home to do. So we're going to do report of the student board members now, just ahead of the budget presentation. So see who'd like to go first. Joseph, would you like to go first? Okay.
Things are going well at Rancho Del Mar. We have had many new students on campus. As of this Monday, we have also had 12 seniors complete the requirements for graduation early. Congratulations to them, and we look forward to their return on June 9th for graduation ceremony. And on a side note, I was one of those 12. I was number 4. This Saturday, the Rancho Del Mar Associated Student Body is proud to be part of the community's Helpline Directory Delivery. Rancho Del Mar student volunteers will be responsible for directory delivery at homes throughout the peninsula. And congratulations to the students of the month for December. Haley Burt for United States History, Alexis Klepper for Comparative Religions, Brandon Navarrete for World History, Christopher Park for Calculus, Viviana Rocha for Economics, Esther Shin for Drawing and Painting, June Shin for Drawing and Painting, Julia Smith for Life Science, Clara Soriano for American Government, and Jonathan Vallejo for Physical Science. Also, I'd like to congratulate those students who received perfect attendance for December: Daniel Atlas, Nicholas Bono, Haley Burt, Brian Castillo, Tommy Dallum, William Hansen, Fred Nashidi, Torian Ortiz, Christopher Park, Victor Ramirez, Justin Rivas, Esther Shin, Claudio Suarez, Jonathan Vallejo, and Lena Vargas.
Thank you, Joseph. David?
So I know a lot has happened at Peninsula since the last time you had an update, but most recently we had our open house last night, and we had about 2,500 to 3,000 people estimated attendance. So it was very good, and we have follow-up principal forums for parents to get better acquainted with our school. The first one was held today, and then we also have 2 more on February 1st and February 9th. Some of the other things that we're getting ready for is just preparing for testing, as we have CASI in March and EIA, as well as our APs in May and our STAR testing in April. And I know that Mrs. Kress has a very high goal of reaching 900 for our API, and she's actually on a mission, so she's scheduled herself to be going to every classroom at our school for 2 weeks and talking about the importance of the STAR test. So we are shooting for that 900 benchmark, and we are going to meet that for next year. Some of the other things we just have, and I know I haven't mentioned sports in the past, but we've had a phenomenal season with our boys basketball. They have a 20-1 record, and just along with that, our student cheering section has been grateful that Mrs. Kress has been willing to bring back the zoo costume.
Do you have any pictures?
I don't. It's in our school newspaper, though, so you should definitely read that. I'm gonna put a little hype for that as the editor-in-chief of our paper.
Should we mention both of our kids dress
Yeah,
up in
yeah.
costumes?
Larry's daughter and my son are part of the zoo, and they were allowed because they are under strict orders to be very well behaved, and they have been, I think. But they were allowed to actually dress up, and so
Mine's a giraffe. Yours is too, isn't it?
my son is 6'6", and he was supposed to be a giraffe, but the giraffe costume didn't fit him. So your daughter, who is about 6 feet tall, is the giraffe, and my son is a flying squirrel.
There's some unique costumes, to say the least.
But they're really great.
So it's really added a fun level of spirit, and I think our administration and parents have been really proud to see the great level of sportsmanship and the maturity in following the guidelines that have been set out by administration. One more upcoming event is Winter Formal that we're having on Saturday, February 5th. And one of the interesting things is this is the first time we've offered charter buses for transportation. So it's just $2 per student. We have we have close to 100 that are going to be taking the bus. And so it's nice to have a safe and affordable option for students. And then one last thing that I want to highlight is that we just had a recent, very generous donation from Mr. and Mrs. Prindle. They had a daughter and son who went through Peninsula. Their daughter, Jackie, was an alumni in 2003. She passed away last year, but as a memorial gift, they donated a very large sum for our new pool. So we're going to be naming the pool after her. It's going to be Jackie's Pool. We know she liked pink, so we're looking into design options to make it very much hers, and we're definitely going to remember her through the pool. So we have a very nice marquee up at the school, and we definitely encourage everyone to go see it. But it's really added a nice new element to our school, and we're definitely looking forward to it. So we really appreciate, and I know Mrs. Kress said that Mr. Sharp was very instrumental in making that happen. So thank you to him, the board, and to the community, and Mr. and Mrs. Prindle as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Okay, let's go back to the budget update.
We thought we'd take an opportunity for those of you who've been following the news. Obviously, Governor Brown came into office, and on January 10th, he started putting a budget plan together, dealing with what he was faced after several years of probably, we heard described earlier by some speakers, it's about state fiscal mismanagement. So he has put a plan together, and we had the opportunity to attend some workshops last week, and we thought we'd give not only share the information with the board, but encourage staff, parents to come and hear what's going on and what we're currently dealing with. So I first thought, you know, recognition, kind of the reality that we've been dealing with for the last 3 or 4 years, but we've been in a state of budget crisis in this for 3 or 4 years, and it's had nothing but negative impacts on the public education system over that period of time. And I think we got to recognize it's been hard on everyone working with a constantly changing budget puzzle. And not only you as a Board of Education trying to make it work in terms of performing your responsibilities as elected leaders, out there with the staff, principals, everyone trying to figure out how to make this work and how to put this all together. And especially knowing that the budget puzzle changes all the time. We've gotten into something that's totally different than what probably we've dealt with in the past, say 10 or 15 years ago, was that we go through periods of time where here's the budget assumptions that the state give us for about 3 months, they're good, and then here's the new budget assumptions, and then here's the new budget assumptions. And that we're always looking at this in terms of changing this puzzle, looking at the pieces, and trying to make all of this work. But I think at first, to start this, and then we'll get into more of the details, but despite all of the reductions, we've been able to maintain high-quality educational programs, and that doesn't happen by accident. So thanking the staff, the parents, our support organizations, the PTA, the foundation, for all their hard work, their effort, their sacrifices, because we wouldn't be able to maintain the kind of program we have in Palos Verdes without that. So starting with that, you know, recognizing that, and then that it's been hard on everyone as we've gone through this process. Unfortunately, we still have tough times in front of us, and we have to figure out how to deal with this as we go forward. Not to go back over the complete history, and we probably could walk you through 3 years of constantly changing budget assumptions based on state budgets, but I thought we would just take it back as kind of a starting point last December. Last December, we were basically putting together our first interim budget report. It was based on the fact the state finally had passed a budget back on October 8th after almost 100 days of being late. And right away, I don't know, what was it, 24 hours to a day or two, we were being told it was a house of cards. It was very faulty, a lot of poor assumptions, and it wasn't going to hold. And basically, all the experts in Sacramento were saying, just hold on, wait through the election, see what takes place, and that you start putting your assumptions together when we get through the election, have a new governor, and a new legislature. But despite that, obviously, no matter what's going on in Sacramento, we have to stick to statutory timelines, and we had to put a budget together in December, or at least a multi-year projection. And so at that time, in order to maintain, and we always backward map from the third year out, in order to maintain a 3% reserve in the end of 2012-2013, we had to make reductions. And you can see the figures, approximately $1.2 million in 11-12 and another $4.9 million in 12-13. And that was at the first interim, and that was in December. And at these time, all these budget revisions included all known resources, including one-time federal jobs money.
Yeah, and I wanted to spend a minute just on the federal jobs program as it relates to our overall budget, because there's been a lot of talk about that money, and there's a perception that somehow that money is independent and a set-aside amount of money from the rest of our budget, when in fact it's been incorporated into the budget. We're fortunate to receive that money from the federal government, obviously, and most districts, and when all districts came to their first interim time, school services recognized the fact that the money infusion from the federal government was really masking what was happening at the local districts in terms of their budgeting for the year we're in now and the next year. We did receive the funding, and the money could be used to retain existing employees hired after August 10th of 2010. It could be used for health care, retirement incentives, support services, replacing furlough days. It was targeted to be used in many different ways. We feel very fortunate that since August 10th, we've been able to hire back almost all those who received a layoff notice last year, and in so doing, we protected class size ratios in the collective bargaining agreement we have with the teachers organization, which is a very high priority for all of us. But we also recognize that this would not have been possible had it not been for concessions given by both CSEA and PVFA. Those are the two employee organizations representing the bulk of our employees. And it's the sacrifice that they gave and that their members did through a shortened work year and furlough days that made our situation be where we are today. And we all recognize that. But to reinstate any of that time lost at this point would only exacerbate the problem of the reductions we would have to make for next year.
So go forward. This is December. Going forward now, obviously we wait. The governor comes in. The governor makes a proposal. And again, we all know how this works because basically what happens is the governor's proposal then becomes almost our budget assumptions until something else gets passed or something else comes along. And so the governor came in, new governor, and he basically told us what everybody knew, that the budget that had been passed was a mess. The state was in the $25 billion plus shortfall, and that he basically proposed $12 billion in budget reductions, and he plans to ask voters to extend taxes and fees that are scheduled to sunset. And his plan gets it to a June election if he can pull that off. So but also, to his credit, he acknowledges the fact that the public school system has taken a disproportionate share of the cuts since 2007 and 8. And so he's trying to find a way to protect public schools if he can from any additional cuts, according to what the governor's saying. So he proposes 2 scenarios for K-12 funding in the 2011 and 12 school year. His education budget, and many of you have already heard this, and again, it's all based on Prop 98, and Prop 98 simplistically is just as a percentage of the budget goes to public school system without getting into too much detail. And so if the state budget is actually down a little bit, that means we get the same percentage, but it's a smaller amount of money. So he's looking in a scenario number 1 that basically the state budget is down slightly, and so when all that is worked out, PVPUSD, we lose about $19 per ADA. For us, that means $211,000. But we have to go back and remember that's in addition to what we identified in December. So if you go back, we identified $1.2 million for 2011 and 12. This would be in addition to that. That's what we would be dealing with in terms of budget reductions.
Walker, I think it's important to note so everybody understands this strategy that the governor has, his election plan that we hope would be successful. But what it has to do with is it requires 2/3 of the legislature to agree to place an initiative on the ballot in June. That would, in a sense, extend taxes, and there's a few of them, that would be extended that are going to sunset. So his strategy, he believes that the public, knowing what the dire consequences will be under scenario 2, which we'll get to in a minute, if not approved, what that would mean for public education. He feels that the public, of the voters of California, will support him in this effort if they know that to extend the taxes that are ready to sunset would save public education from scenario 2 that he believes that the public will go along with that. It was interesting, I just heard this morning, the Public Policy Institute just came out with their polls yesterday, or announced them yesterday, that in fact, according to their polling, 60% of the likely voters in the state of California would support his plan were it to get on the ballot if they knew that there was a direct connection to public education.
So before you leave, though,
So sure.
you're going to go on to scenario 2, and I know that there are other factors out there that may change things, but basically this is best case scenario.
Right, and we're going to show that in a minute when we get to a line graph, that this is right now, as best we know, is best case scenario.
So best case scenario, it's an additional $200,000 hit. So
And like Bill-
1.4 is what we're really talking about.
And like Bill said, this is assuming he's successful, he can get a ballot measure onto the ballot and the voters support it.
Okay.
He also, timing-wise, I'm not sure I mentioned that, he has until the 1st of March or thereabouts to have the legislature place it, agree to place it on the ballot. The ballot itself would be like June 7th.
So scenario number 2 is really, I describe it as the election plan is not successful. Either it doesn't get on the ballot or it doesn't get 50% of the voters to support it. So the base revenue limit then, when you put all this together, will be reduced by $19 per ADA based on scenario number 1, plus another $330 per ADA for a total reduction of about $349. And what this equates to in PVPUSD is $4 million. We're rounding, but it's in the neighborhood of $4 million in terms of another cut going into 2011 and 12. Again, this is in addition to the reductions identified in the first interim budget report. So it's huge. It's a large number.
We're over 5.
Yes. And again, we've used this and we've all had debates at this table about how to use the line graph and what works and what doesn't work, and I'll let them all share their thoughts on the subject. But You know, if you look at the green line and you go back to 2007-8, we were at $5,778.95 per student. And there was a time in our careers that we would have complained about flat funding, and that's what the green line shows. We would have said, flat funding, that really hurts us because our costs continue to go up, but our revenues are staying like this. And so now we probably in this business would find it to be a godsend if we could get flat funding and that we just had stayed even with where we were in 2007-8. And you can see the 3 or 4 year history. That's why, you know, I keep coming back to that, and I think most people know, but we've been dealing with this, like I said from the beginning, since about 2007 and 8. If you look down by 2009 and 10, the 5,200 and change, and I can't do the math in my head as fast as Larry does, but we're dealing with $578 loss per student. If you think that across, that's a loss of approximately $6 to $7 million in ongoing revenue a year on just by that reduction. If you go farther down and you can see scenario 1 and 2 for 2011 and 12, the worst case scenario, that 4856, is a loss of about $922 per student. That would be a loss of between $10 and $11 million in ongoing income a year if that plan kicks into place from over about a 4-year period. I think what's important, and again, leaving the green line in, that gap between the green line and the blue line, that's ongoing revenue that we're losing each and every year. Yes, we've gotten federal money. Yes, the PTAs have stepped up. Yes, the foundation's increased its commitment to the school district. It doesn't make up for that gap. That money's gone, and most of those resources are often viewed as one-time money on the way we have to account for them. So this, you know, we're trying to find ways to show what we're dealing with, to kind of give a picture, and that in this election scenario, or the scenario 1 and 2, it's just, I don't know what other word to use, but it's just frightening in terms of trying to deal with that situation going forward. So this is, again, what school services is giving us at this time. Obviously, as we get more information from the county, we'll change some of our assumptions, but this kind of gives you an idea in terms of the funding source.
Because we deal with this all the time and we throw around the lingo, for those people in the audience who are not as used to this information, the ADA, remember, is an average daily attendance. So we don't get paid for the number of students from the state that we have enrolled, but based upon how they attend. And we track that, you'll see in some slides coming up. But also the red line, which is called the statutory revenue limit. Now there's a recognition in the state by statute that school funding should increase by a cost of living index because there's a recognition that our costs do go up from one year to the next. The red line is what we are entitled to by statute. The state does track that because then what they do is they say, if you look to the far right for 11-12, well, we know that you should get $6,451 roughly per student, but we can't afford to do that right now, so we're going to deficit. They apply a deficit percentage to what you would normally get, and the deficit then drops us all the way down to 5186. Of course, it could go farther if, in fact, depending upon which scenario happens in the governor's budget plan. So that huge gap does get tracked, and at some point, there's a promise that they will meet their statutory requirement and give us the money back due that we should be getting. Obviously, in the economic times we've experiencing 708, the state has tracked it, but been unable to pay it, and in fact has followed us down the blue line to that is what, in fact, they've been able to afford to pay us.
And then what you're going to add later is that that's not even what they're paying us.
Yes.
The $5,200 that is listed there for 2010-11 is what they're supposed to pay us.
Yeah,
So
now
they're going to defer
Larry's
paying us about 20% of it.
Larry's getting ahead of the slideshow presentation.
Sorry.
But you're right, and it's important to look at it while it's on as a visual here. Even the base revenue limit for 10-11, the 5205, is money that we have to track, put into the budget based upon our ADA, gives us an amount of money under our revenue. But in fact, through a deferral program, the state will say, you know, the payment of the portion that we owe you, which they do monthly, the payment that we were going to send you in April, you know, we can't really send it to you in April, so we're going to send it to you the next year in August. Well, they've done that, what now, 9 times for different payments that they're supposed to make to us. They push them out to the future. That's how they kick the can forward and what they've been doing to us in terms of the budget scenarios in Sacramento. So that when we say, for example, we have a percentage reserve, That's not true cash. It used to be cash was king, and you'll see that the phrase now being thrown around is credit is king. That you have to, because we have to meet our payroll monthly, about $7 million, and we have to go out at times of the year, without getting too complicated, to borrow that money in order to meet payroll. But we're getting ahead of ourselves.
So some of the other budget assumptions, and again, as we go through and we get ready for the second interim, we will obviously come up with others. But one of the things the governor is proposing, and it appears that they'll allow us to count this in our budget, is that they extended the sunset dates for categorical flexibility. And the one that we were worried about was more of the CSR one, because under the old rules, it would have sunset to the end of 2013, and we would have had accounted for the loss of that.
But again, for people who don't follow this
Okay.
information, the state gives us money or used to, for every time they design a program in Sacramento, they'll say, okay, here's how much money you get to institute the program. And believe me, it's never enough. But it's called categorical funding, meaning they give you it for a certain category, and it's restricted money, you're expected to spend it on that. Well, when the state got into trouble and they were sending us money for restricted reasons, they said, you know what, because we can't fund your base revenue limit, whatever we were sending you for special things, go ahead and use it for whatever you want. So that's called categorical flexibility, and they've now extended that through June of 2015. CSR the terminology is class size reduction program for the state. Started back when Wilson was governor, and put a lot of money by the state into the plan that would reduce class sizes to 20 students in each classroom, kindergarten through third grade. And that money comes to us above the base revenue limit. However, they now have instituted a whole sliding scale of penalties that allow you to go with higher class sizes, but they don't give you as much money. And we were afraid that in our third year out, we would have to go back to 20, not afraid because it would be a good thing, but that going back to 20-to-1 means the hiring of additional teachers without additional funding. So they've extended that flexibility too. You don't have to keep classes at 20-to-1. We'll send you money for the first 20 kids, but not beyond that, if you needed to have 22, 23, 24, we won't send you money for those kids above 20, but we'll at least fund something, and that flexibility will continue through June of 2014.
Some of the other areas that we're going to be dealing with budget assumptions, and this one was relatively new over the past year, is that, and again, without getting into all the details, that there was a funding source with students that needed services through the Department of Mental Health, and they obviously are students with special needs, and basically that money was blue penciled by the governor, even though it was passed by the legislature, and it appears right now that the impact of that will be placed back on the school system until they pass either new legislation to deal with that subject or come up with another funding source. And even though the governor's coming up, or the current governor's coming up with a proposal for 11 and 12 and 12-13, the money in 2010 and 11 is uncertain now. Last week, I think I gave you something that we were ballparking at 600. Now we're getting some new work today that shows it's probably around the area of 700,000. So that's a one-time impact on special education, and we'll see how it plays out in the in the court system or through the legislative process. But for right now, we're having to address that, or probably put that into the budget. We've already mentioned, again, without going too much more into it, the deferral of $2.1 million. It's really true now. This is on top of all the other deferrals, and we keep trying to find ways to explain this so people understand it, but it's become so complicated in terms of tracking the business department, in terms of tracking money that's supposed to come into us, it's not coming into us, when it's supposed to come into us, and they're tracking each and every month. The county's requiring it, but we would be crazy if we weren't doing it. Each and every month, do you have enough actual cash, not what it shows on the books, but actual cash, to meet payroll and pay your bills? And and you can, it sounds like big numbers if we're dealing with our own personal finances, but when you get down to, say, $1 million or $2 million in cash flow in a $90 million business where it takes $7 million plus to make payroll every month, that gets a little frightening. And so you always have to deal with it. And there are ways that we are, but we're tracking this carefully now. But this next deferral of $2.1 billion probably cost the school district about $4 million that'll be deferred. And again, we're now dealing with deferral on top of deferral with on top of deferral, so it's a great tracking process. Were you going to add something?
Well, no, I just try to do the simple description of it. We should be getting $52 million this year. They're going to send us about $40 million. The other $12 million they're going to send us next year sometime. Well, every year that gap has gotten larger and larger and larger. And why has it happened? Because the state says, we don't have enough money to fund things, so our budget that ends on June 30th, we're going to defer some stuff. Well, we don't have to count that in our budget because we're pushing it off to next year. But you get to count it in your budget, and you have to be able to pay for it. So every year it gets worse and worse and worse. And the idea when they first started was, well, we'll do it once, and then next year we'll pay you back and everything will be good. Well, we did it once, and then we did it the second time, and now it got bigger. The third time, bigger. It's so large now that it's $9 billion or something like that, that even if the economy turned around and there was $3 billion more, $4 billion more for the schools every year for the next few years, it's going to take several years just to get the deferral back and get us back to a cash neutral position. So when we look at a budget that says, our budget on paper says we have $3 million in reserves, it's not cash because we're owed $10 and $12 million. And so we can't even look at a budget and say, this is the smart thing to do to budget this way. We have to look at the cash we end up with, because one day we could show we have a reserve and we literally have no cash. We can't borrow the cash, we can't, we can't make payroll. If we, and so that's the fallacy of even looking at the budgets the way the state is doing it now. It's really sad.
And if there's one major change in following school district finance for the last 2 decades, this is really it. This is the new ball game, and it's obviously caused a lot of confusion about how the money flows. And I thought I'd just, and it's my way to make a pitch for the PEF, and I think I saw Kate in the audience. Even with the PEF contribution, we obviously are encouraging, and they're doing a lot of work to try to get to that contribution for this year and what they've pledged. But unless they can get to there may be some question about whether they can pledge that again next year. So, so we have to keep pushing those groups too that are our partners and helping them get to these kind of contributions to make this work.
Could I chime in?
Yep.
Many of us have gone to Sacramento in the past. When I was with the Ed Foundation, we used to go to Sacramento, and we'd also always be pleading to make Palos Verdes whole with some of our neighboring districts as far as what revenue we receive per student. That's a topic called equalization. We, out of the 47 unified school districts in the county, we're in the bottom quartile is what we receive per student, because the finance formula devised by the state of California that since I've been on the board, probably even longer than that, they've been talking about, yeah, it needs revision. Because, for example, one of the factors it uses a basis year of 1974 to determine what we get per student, and it gives new definition of the word cockamamie. But this equalization idea is one that exemplifies you got to be careful what you pray for, because we have equalization. We have equalization in the point that in the worst case scenario, whether you are Manhattan Beach or San Marino or Beverly Hills or what's the school district where Larry Tramotola is? Pleasant?
Palo Alto, maybe.
Up in Palo Alto, which are the top feeders of the amount of revenue they get per state. Piedmont. They too are, along with them, they are going to be cut $349 per student. They are unified school districts, along with us. So we've gotten our equalization. It's just that it comes is we're all getting hit by the same size stick. It's not being proportionately doled out. So the other point is that there's a misconception that because of the wonderful contribution we have from our citizens with the parcel taxes, with the Ed Foundation, with our PTAs and boosters, that somehow that's our equalization. I once heard a lieutenant governor of the state saying, equalization, you have your equalization. Your Ed Foundation is your equalization. You only wish. We don't qualify for the majority of categorical programs that are available. The, what did they call it? The ARRA funding, I have to look it up because we got such a little bit of amount. We aren't falling off a cliff because of the stimulus money. We just didn't get the kind of money that some of the neighboring districts where we got, what, probably, was it $3 or $4 million, something in that ballpark. I don't remember offhand. But I mean, it was in the single digit of millions. LA Unified was in the hundreds of millions, what they achieved. That's why they have such a problem, because that was one-time money. So I point that out, that if you add in all this wonderful contributions we get locally, we move up maybe 2 positions from like number 38 out of 47 school districts to about 36th out of 47 school districts because of these contributions. So it's a misconception that I've heard for 10 years that somehow all the local funding has raised us up so we can compete for the best teachers with Manhattan Beach, El Segundo, Beverly Hills, San Marino, some of those that I mentioned. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you. So it gets to the bottom line, what does this mean? And so we break it down for right now with everything factored in for scenario number 1. We're now looking in 2011 and 12 about 1.4 million, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 million for 2012, 2013. And again, things can change as we go forward, but for right now, based on the information we have. If you look at scenario 2, this is obviously the awful situation that we're dealing with, almost 5 million and 5 million, 10 million over the next 2 budget years, which obviously means that everything has to be discussed as part of the solution. So, you know, it's just becoming larger and larger numbers as we try to find ways to solve some of this. I've been asked, how does this break down, to kind of give an idea about it in terms of how the percentages of the budget works. You know, about 57% of the budget is represented by certificated employees, and you can see it equates to about 44 full-time positions. Classified employees are about $1 million of that. It's about 25 full-time positions. Management employees represent about 7% of the budget. So you can see as we go through this where you have to try to go for $5 million to try to break this down. And it's, again, it's on top of what we've already done. And so Bill mentioned it earlier, you know, and you can see the list, and I don't have to go through it point by point. As we dealt with prior budget problems, we had to go to this list in order to try to make it all work. And again, that means obviously we have less employees. Employees have taken a hit to make all this work. If it wasn't for the PTA stepping up, we wouldn't have supplies and materials that they've been able to actually do so much for us to make that work in terms of donations. The site discretionary funds, if you talk to principals, are really zero, coming from the school district at least, unless they're getting donations. So it's been, this is, over to make this all work, we've had to go to these areas. But now we're talking about, we've done many of these things, and now where do we go from there?
Could you go back a second?
Sure.
Just to highlight the one thing, when you say you reduce by work days, that's salary reduction. I mean,
Yes.
that's people
That's
need
what's
to
what-
understand that. So we pay by the day. So if we take 6 days off of a 180-day schedule, that's a 3% pay
Correct.
reduction that our staff agreed to.
How much do you recall, 1 day, how much did that save us?
About 300,000
300,000?
for all employees,
For all employees, 1 day, and that.
all certificate classified.
Okay, and that equates, I know it's hard, how many jobs approximately, you range?
Oh, well, at our, you know, for teachers, we use an FTE equivalent of about $65,000. We use a $40,000 figure for 1 FTE on classified.
It's been
So you're-
7 positions that, thankfully, because we were able to achieve that, thanks to the staff, we were able to save some jobs that way.
And compound that, not just they took a reduction through their agreement, but also we increased class sizes, which
Yeah,
also
so we
eliminated-
tightened them up. We lived within our ratios, but we tightened up as to the staffing we have at each site. And so we have averages across the district are showing that we're within our contractual obligation. But because
At
we were
elementary level, we increased our class sizes.
right, and we, you know, and that was something, yes, we agreed to go up to 24-1 at some levels in our K-3 program. So, yeah, you know, I can't emphasize enough that the employees have taken, through cooperation, again, of the employee organizations, but the individual sacrifice that our employees have made. And, you know, it gets to be, 2 years ago when we started this process, we said, just help us get through the next couple of years, because It was at that time that people were saying if we could just get through the next couple of years, the economy will start turning around, you'll see more revenue coming into the state and all that, of course, as it plays out for a local school district. In fact, now they're saying, it's going to be another couple of years. I just heard a report today that we really can't expect nationwide for our unemployment rate to get down to, the reasonable 4 and 5% till about 2016. And the economy of California kind of mirrors what goes on nationally. So this has been just tough. And yet, for our classified and our certificate employees, if you visit a site and you walk down the hallways, the kids are excited, the teachers are doing their job, and the classified support staff is there. And, on the surface, you may not know what has gone on behind the scenes, but they know it as individuals because they've had to live with the reduced salaries. And I don't know how long more you can keep doing this without it affecting the morale to the point that then it turns around and affects the delivery of a great educational program that we have here in PV.
Some budget requirements, again, where we're going to kind of finish this up. We're really, the next report that we're required to make to the state and to the county is the second interim report, and we'll do that in March. And again, just to remind everybody, we're required to demonstrate solvency, including sufficient reserves. And even though some of those reserves are on paper, or they are not necessarily cash, but we have to show that we have those through the 2012-2013 year. And again, one of the new requirements that have come out of all of this is tracking cash flow that's required of the school districts. I think the one area as we go forward, and we got to have this discussion out there, is obviously in 2011, 2012, when we adopt a budget in June, we have to include in substance through 2013, 2014, and I think Malcolm referenced that earlier. We will have to show that year without parcel tax revenue because the county won't let us assume the continuation of that unless something goes back to the voters. So, and again, as we shoot through June 30th, that's when we'll be dealing with the 2013, going through that third year in 2013-14. I think to answer some questions too about ADA, we track this. Obviously, we track it very closely, and one of the worst things that could probably be happening is if we were taking a budget hit from the state and also seeing a loss of a lot of students going at the same time. So you can see since 2006 and 7, this is P2 ADA. We did this average daily attendance in April of every year. And so last year, as usual, we've had some ups and downs since 2006 and 7, but we've stayed somewhat in the ballpark within 100 or 200 students with it. As of 2010 and 11, at our first interim in December, we were still holding 11,535 as part of our budget assumptions. But we will analyze this as part of the second interim. But what usually happens, and we saw it this December, actually, we were slightly better in terms this December than we were last year. But it's not about how many students are at the school, it's the percentage of their attendance. And all you have to do is take a small drop, and even if it's something from, say, 97.5% to 96.5% attendance, it can hit you by $600,000. So actually, when we opened schools September, October, November, the enrollment looked good. We were kind of holding. We took a hit in December, which is not unusual. And then we've got to watch this in January and February to see how it ends in terms of plays out. The P2, which becomes our official attendance marking point, is in April. So if we can come to the second interim and make an adjustment on our ADA assumptions, that's a good thing, and we will. And so we're looking at that. But again, I don't think people get the magnitude of just a small drop off in attendance and how it impacts you. It doesn't have to be necessarily your enrollment drops off, it's the actual attendance rate. So we're going to have to, as we go through this, and this was a slide actually and hasn't changed much from last year, we as circumstances change, we'll clarify our assumptions. We have to look at our revenue, our expenditures, our cash flow for the second interim. As we get direction from the county, in fact, Bill and Amber are going to a workshop with county officials and Kevin Gordon, I think it's next Monday or Tuesday, to kind of see what how the county is interpreting all of this and kind of direction they'll give us for the second interim. We're going to continue, just like this evening, to share information. We probably will start hitting school sites and talking to staff and meeting with support organizations, taking input, developing lists, prioritizing with all of this. We're always looking at possible revenue enhancements, and we're open up for suggestions. Obviously, some of the programs we've run came out of some of the budget crisis in the past, and we've gotten them started. But unfortunately, and Bill will walk you through some of this, it doesn't mean that we will have an opportunity to know the true budget picture before the timelines take place in terms of layoffs. And so we're going to have to go through probably that process in terms of making sure we're taking precautions and being able to, protect the district in terms of the budget.
This is a nice chart showing the certificated layoff process for you, and up above is, what we've all come to know, that in late February, actually February 24th in this district, we'll probably have a resolution to bring to the board that will reduce certificated service across, and announce, the number of positions and what discipline in the secondary system we would have to declare as those to be laid off. Now, we have to, by statute, we have to do that by actually adopt the resolution and then issue the notices prior to March 15th. These are preliminary layoff notices, as we've explained before. Anywhere along this timeline, some of those can be rescinded once that they've been issued. But we would have a hearing, probably in April and May, to determine whether we've done it according to the rules of the state of California regarding seniority. And an administrative law judge who hears the case must render a decision by May 7th, giving us then final abilities to get the final layoff notice to actually be served by May 15th. Now, you notice that that doesn't time very well with the lower part of this chart, which is showing what the governor's all about, what could be going on in the state that could maybe perhaps alleviate the need for us to assume a larger reduction than might be necessary, because it won't be till May 14th that we see a May revision. It's in March. Remember, I told you that we'll know whether he can get that on the ballot for June. The June 7th is the special election. It's past the point of the final notices being issued. And so we'll have to move along on the statute requirements above, trying to minimize as much as possible the number of people that would be impacted by this. What also impacts it, of course, is retirements and people who resign because they're leaving the area. And so those numbers come into play here. And as I say, all along from February to March to April till the final notice is being issued, we can rescind the preliminary notices even. And then again after May 15th as well, as many people know from last year. After the final notices are issued, they also can be rescinded. And gosh, our hope would be that there's a budget initiative that would be adopted in early June, and even before the end of the school year, we'll kind of know where we really are for the next school year.
Before you leave this
Yes.
one, though, even if in March, before March 15th, we knew that the measure was going to get on the ballot, and even if the polling that you discussed showed that the election was, likely to pass, we've been talking about two scenarios, but really, in terms of this process, we don't have a choice. Correct?
Because the county, and we've heard this before with the parcel tax, they will never allow us to assume an election's going to be successful.
So even if we wanted to,
Right.
it wouldn't fly.
Right, it
So even though we're talking about two scenarios, we have to go by the number two, the worst-case scenario. We have no choice, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And that's for budgeting purposes and for layoff notice purposes.
Correct.
Now, as you said, if things change and the election gets on the ballot and it succeeds, and then we can rescind, but in terms of the notices,
The timeline doesn't work for us
Right.
to know that we could avoid doing the up above part of the chart, because everything that we hope to have happen is below the line there is way to the right of the final notices. That's the
I just wanted to make
that's
it
the
clear
problem.
that even though there are two possibilities,
Right.
we really have no choice.
We
We're
have
going to
one.
have, yeah, exactly.
And with the classified
Now,
layoff-
classified layoff, the procedures are, obviously you have to give notice to your employees that you're laying off. You have to adopt a resolution of what positions you would be eliminating, should you need to actually eliminate positions or go through a process of reduction. And their deadline is a 45-day notice for people to have received and therefore be noticed that they're being laid off. So as you see on the chart, April 28th, it would be about the 45-day mark to the end of June 30th, because the next fiscal year starts July 1, and that would be the date at which, for certain types of employees, that the fiscal year begins and their job may begin for our, of course, 12-month employees. Now, so there are many employees who actually do not show to work until, and I'm thinking of special education assistants, for example, that do not show to work till September, so the 45-day notice for them is a little different. But The problem, not the problem, but because of the bumping that can go on in a classified service of a person who is laid off, may have held a previous job which they can bump into, that it ends up being that person who actually gets the layoff notice. And so that process of figuring out who that all is and the puzzle that goes with that is another thing that takes time to do, and you need to get a good head start on that to know where you may end up.
So a few other topics, obviously when we've been through this process, obviously as we look at creating lists in terms of where we're going to go for figures like $5 million, there's things we have control over and things that we have to bargain, and it's often asked of us, okay, well, what about this and what about that? These are topics that are subject to the collective bargaining process. And so usually the initial list that we develop for reducing the budget are usually, in fact, the county almost tells us, don't assume collective bargaining agreements. You have to come up with cuts that you can make that you have control over. So this is just in terms of an informative, with those areas where we would have to go to deal with the collective bargaining process. Just to finish up for us, and you can see in terms of board meetings as we go through the process between February and June, and there's probably, in fact, there's a budget calendar on your agenda tonight with more detail than this, but it gives you a little bit of idea about some of the meetings that are coming up, when we're dealing with the second interim report, when we're looking at precautionary certificated layoffs, when we get P2 attendance. The May revise is one of those markers in the state budget process that sometimes brings worse news, sometimes better. It's the point in time where everybody supposedly has paid their taxes in April, and the state counts up all their revenue, and they see if their projections are better or worse from that point in time. And so that sometimes comes with a different proposal coming out of Sacramento. So as we go through this is obviously, tonight was to get started, to kind of give you an idea about what we know. As we go through getting ready for the second interim or any of these other dates, things could change. We would like to believe it would change for the better. But like you pointed out, Dora, it's right now, based on what we know, we have to go with Plan B because that's what we'll be required to do. And I brought this back from Malcolm not to make light of the situation, but it was when you're superintendent, sometimes you keep believing, especially if you're positive, there's light at the end of the tunnel. But as Malcolm pointed out, the train may be coming my direction. So I use this as kind of about like that. And really, you do try to stay upbeat. You try to believe that there's an end to this, and we're going to eventually get to the end of this budget crisis going on with the state. And with that, I would take questions or any other input that you have on this subject.
I have a question. Actually, it goes, you don't have to bring the slide back, but one thing some people have asked me, some parents have said, well, why don't you do what they've done in Oregon, for instance, or other states where they've cut the school year drastically? And why don't you explain, there's both contractual and legal requirements of
Right, the
flexibility.
one of the flexibility items given to school districts a couple of years ago, and again, related to budget, was that there used to be a 180-day instructional day minimum for the state of California. And by giving us, quote, the flexibility, the governor pushed the flexibility down to a school district to go down to 175 instructional days if you wanted to, but it was a local decision. Now, obviously, what he did in that enactment of that particular education code was to push down the decision to the local bargaining where you, in working with your employee organizations, because the number of work days in their contract is specified, and that's obviously a subject of bargaining. So we have, as the chart indicated before there, we have reduced, we used to have 185 days. It was pretty standard, most districts. We had the 180 days of instruction. We had 3 staff development days, pulling people together for professional development, and 2 days that we gave as a pre-service and post-service day. Right now, through negotiations with our employee organizations on the teaching side, the certificated side of the fence, you saw the chart, we've reduced down to 176 instructional days and a pre and a post-service day and 1 staff development. So the work year is now reduced to 179. But again, those are negotiable items for negotiation. On the classified.
Before you leave that, but there is a limit. So how much further could we go? I mean, legally, we could only go 3 more days.
What are we at now
75
versus 4 more
total.
days?
Okay.
You know, you can't, but, well, you weren't asking for a recommendation, were you? Because
Sure,
I would,
give me a recommendation.
because I would not suggest.
Yeah, Bill, give me a
that we-
recommendation.
that all of a sudden, just
Right.
out of thin air, everyone would show up on the first day of school and school would open. There's lots of things that need to be taken care of ahead of time.
But it is important to note that that's happening all over the county and all over the city of Los Angeles.
We have lots of school districts where they've rolled back instructional days, chopped days off of last year. And everybody's struggling with this. Everybody's situation is a little different. There are some districts that have not done an instructional day, loss, but their class sizes might be 40, at high school. So there's different ways that different districts deal with the issues and with their own employee organizations as to how they arrive at the solutions that meet the needs of the district and its budget, and also that the employees can live with.
Thank you for explaining that.
question.
Mhm.
Yeah, you don't have to go back to the chart, but there's both the scenario 1 and the scenario 2, and then on both charts, however, though it's interesting, the conversation's really about for 11, 12, it could be 1.4 million in reductions or 5 million, depending on what happens in the election. But that next year out, regardless of what happens in the election, we have 5 million cut either way. Is there anything that can adjust that right now?
Actually, you can adjust those numbers. And again, some of the logic in building budgets is that actually the more cuts you can make in the first year actually helps you because they carry over. If you maintain them, they carry over into the second year. So those can be adjusted. It's part of, the decision-making process and trying to deal with it. But it's just, you can't adjust those. We basically always just backward map. Bottom line, what does it take to stay at 3%, and what is the level of cuts? So you can adjust those, though.
I just think it's important to point out because it's a variable we have to consider when not only are we thinking about what's happening now, we're also have to at least have it on the radar that there's a $5 million cut the next year too.
And I think it's important to emphasize at least the way we started with the process. We're trying to not look too far in the future, get too pessimistic about the future, and cut our nose off to spite ourselves. We'll make that decision somewhere down the road. But we're at least initially budgeting so that we're trying to stay relatively close to what we're offering now at the end of the day once we know what the situation is.
And if the economy, the state is looking at this all the time, but if the economy were to improve at all in the next 2 years, for example, that may impact what we would have to do down there in the years out. It's just that we have to hedge our bets, so to speak.
Well, the other thing we have to be careful about is that if the economy starts doing better, it doesn't necessarily going to translate into an increased amount of money. an increased budget amount coming to us. It could really manifest itself simply in just an increased amount of cash coming back to us. Because at some point, the cash part comes back, and that does nothing for our budget other than keep us from running out of cash.
Right. And at the state level, they've been talking about there are systemic problems. But, our state is so dependent on the personal income tax, so dependent on the capital gains tax. It's hard to tax something when you have capital loss. The third rail of California politics is still with us, Prop 13. I don't know whether the current governor is going to want to touch that one, but who knows? We are in interesting times.
Interesting that he was governor when that was enacted. That Governor Brown was a governor when that was enacted.
Any other questions from board members? Okay, then at this point, I do have some cards from some speakers who'd like to speak on this topic, so I'm going to go ahead and call them now. And I'm going to call them all at once. Normally, we don't do it this way, but there was a request that they all be called at once, and they're all going to come up at once, so we're going to accommodate that. That's fine. So I'm just going to read off the cards that I have for this topic. Michael Blois, Tracy Bufano, Melinda Hill, River Fay, Abby Mader, Mimi Cohen, Jeff Guerrero, Chris Engel, Colette Dunn, Michael Leholt, Jason Calazar.
Someone got bumped by one of the announcements.
Good evening. We've come out tonight to voice our position to you, the governing board, because we have concerns about the district's ability to maintain the high-quality program that the community has come to expect year after year.
Is that mic on, just a minute?
It is, you have to
Okay,
really.
okay, you got to,
We've come out tonight to
Handle it,
voice our
there you go.
position to you, the governing board, because we have concerns about the district's ability to maintain the high-quality program the community has come to expect year after year.
Palos Verdes Faculty Association is in agreement with the district that it's in everyone's best interest to maintain a 3% reserve. We have not advocated dipping below that mark, even though it was permissible to do so last year. And we are not asking for you to dip into the nearly 13% in reserves that the district has currently.
While we felt very strongly that cuts to the school year and to our teaching and support staff were not necessary, we believed it was more important at the time to compromise, as we wanted the students, their families, and ours to be able to move forward with scheduling their own plans. PVFA felt then, and it is our position now, that student days should not have been cut.
Obviously, cutting teachers' contact time cuts the amount of material that can be covered with students. In this age of ever-increasing standards and academic rigor, students are being asked to learn more and more with less and less instruction from their teachers.
In good faith, we agreed to cut instructional minutes last year with the hope that there would be some actions taken on the state or federal level that would allow those instructional minutes to be restored. Actions were taken. Restoration is possible.
The federal government intervened to restore jobs, school days, and benefits. Obviously, the Ed Job Bill was designed to save education jobs, and our members need and want the salary schedule to be restored. January 1st, we saw a dramatic reduction in pay due to the increase in health insurance premiums. Many have had hundreds of dollars taken from their pay.
We care very deeply about the students that we teach in the community in which we spend most of our waking hours. The students of the Palos Verdes Peninsula Unified School District are provided with a top-notch education. Our schools are ranked among the top in the nation. The educators here do a fantastic job of providing rigorous, interesting, differentiated learning opportunities and memorable school experiences for all our students.
Our dedication to our students is evident in the consistently high level of student achievement. While many districts are suffering declining enrollment, ours continues to grow. A testament to the quality of education in our district, and we make that happen.
180 days of instruction cannot be compressed into 176 days. We are faced with the dilemma of what to omit from our curriculum in order to comply with the shortened academic year. We shouldn't have to do this now that the district has received over $2 million to restore our school year.
So we stand before you tonight to urge the use of the $2.2 million to restore instructional time for our students and to make the proper adjustment to our salary schedules. We need every bit of time we can get with our students to glean the high levels of performance. We also want to see the faculty continue to be able to meet their commitments to their families.
The governor has released his budget proposal and has said no more cuts to K-12 education. While we acknowledge this is the first of several steps in the budget process, it is clear that there is support for schools at the highest levels of government and a strong message is being sent. For the sake of our students and for our families, use the Ed Jobs money as they were intended. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments?
And we will be back every meeting, and probably on the February 10th meeting, we'll be back with initial plans on how to meet our goals and maybe updated information from the county about how to plan for going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item K, public communication, and the first one is public communication on non-agenda items. Jana, do we have any cards? Okay. The second one is public communication on open session agenda items, and we will take those as the item comes up on the agenda. Okay, let's move on to item L, budget. One is the budget calendar.
And this is a draft for feedback, and actually, if you want me, I can't find Amber in the audience. Is Amber here?
There she
But
is.
oh, there she is. If you have questions, Amber, if you can come up, I mean, this is a draft. We've done this before. If you want to indicate things that you want changed or added to it, then we can do it now, and then we can bring it back as a final version at the next meeting. Barbara had already mentioned and I already I'll put it down on as the May 15th, the final layoff notice, so we'll make that change on the calendar. Is there anything else anybody saw on it that they would change or have us bring back?
Well, I want to emphasize that we will be meeting on the 24th of February, even though that is that one of the furlough days?
Part of the furlough week.
It's part of the
Yeah, part of that furlough
Right.
week.
It's
yeah.
part of the February recess.
Right. But independent of that, we'll still be meeting.
Again, if you have any between now and when we build the agenda for next time, if somebody comes up with something, let me know, let Amber know, and we'll make sure it gets onto the calendar then, okay?
Okay, so any other questions or comments for Amber? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Amber.
Good job, Amber.
Okay, let's move on to item M, facilities construction program.
Like in Arash and...
Arash there? Here?
Arash is back there.
Raj?
Arash, Matt, I don't, who's here? I'm trying to pick people out of the audience here.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. I wave, and half the audience waves.
Hi, Raj. Hi. And is Matt here as well? Or-
Okay.
Okay. All right, so the first item is the construction status report. Anybody have any comments, questions about that? Okay, then we have three more items, item 2, 3, and 4. We could take those as a group unless someone would like to pull an item. Do you want to pull one, Tony?
Yeah, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, why don't you take a...
Either 2, 3, or 4.
It was one of the change orders. Was that in
Change orders.
That would have been number 4.
Yeah, it's all monster. So pull 4 for a second and then let me...
Okay, so we'll pull 4. So items 2 and 3, would someone like to move approval of those?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. Okay, that carries. Before we go on, while you're still, are you still thinking, Tony?
Go ahead,
Back to item 1, or sort of a general question. We had a facilities meeting specifically, and I've discussed this with Larry, some issues regarding the pool and the transformer box. And are you going to be at the meeting that they're having on Monday? Or do you guys have?
Matt is supposed to be. Are you coming too?
Will you be there? Oh, good. Because I've conveyed my concerns to Larry. I think we need to, I'd like to know what it would take to move some of the items that we discussed before, cost, in terms of cost, in terms of feasibility, so that we could have more room if we needed more room. So I just want to make sure you're going to be there and you
Well,
can fill us
I
in.
know the topic of that transformer came up at a meeting I was at today, and it's, you touch it and you pay.
Well, there's some
Well,
concerns, but
yeah.
it would be nice, to know,
We may- I
just
don't
to
think
get
we
a
have
general
all
outline of what all things were
Okay.
considered when we have the discussion.
We can talk offline, but I think we need to learn more about that whole issue.
Okay.
Okay, item 4, Tony?
Just anytime there's a large ticket item on the change orders, I think you've probably seen the pattern that I'm curious to know how this happens. And this one, it's relocate the existing conduits and install additional circuits and outlets in Building 5. And the thing that always strikes me is when it's not included in the original scope of work. I just want to know why wasn't it? Is it something unforeseen? And So on this, I think there's 5 or 6 times it says not included in the original scope of work. Some of them are very minor, you know, I mean, $475 is not minor for everybody, but it's minor compared to the $16,000 one. Is it each time these are all kinds of things, especially from like a gas line for a heater in one room to the other? I mean, it just seems as though.
That one was, I think, one of the heating units.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was existing in the heating unit was functional, but it was discovered that it's not heating the classroom. It wasn't part of the school work. The school asked us to look into it. We realized that they have to connect it to the gas line.
Okay, so all of these, in your professional opinion, it was the right time to do it, they weren't in the original scope, and they should have been done now, or else it would cost more? Okay.
And as a general comment, when we go into buildings like this where we're doing basically remodeling without doing a bunch of tear-down work, are we more or less likely to have these kinds of conditions?
Rosh, is your light on? Just is.
Oh, yeah, could you turn on?
It is on now, I guess.
Okay, all right. So just in general, we're more likely to have these kinds of conditions. But even with these conditions in this project, what are we running as in change orders?
We have 10% contingency reserves, and we have used probably around 7 to 8% of that. And major part of it is due to the louvers that we ran into a lot of rusty beams that we had to replace, and also upgrading the wood species of the louvers. So I think $36,000 of the entire change orders is just due to that.
I did have a question just being on site, and that is the painting on the rain gutters. Is that going to be finished as part of the scope of work? Because it's peeling paint off the rain gutters and on the edges of the building.
They've done some of it. Some of the rain gutters are in very bad condition. So the district is replacing some of the rain gutters that are in bad condition. But as we speak, the contractor, not right now, but they're painting the rain gutters with basically brown paint, so it will look much better.
Would you like to move approval?
Sure, move approval.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, that carries. Thank you, Arash.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, let's move on to the consent calendar. See if any board members would like to pull items. Tony, would you like to pull anything?
No.
Okay, Barbara?
3 and 4.
Okay. Milk?
I just had 4, but
Okay.
everything else is fine.
Good, Larry?
No.
Okay. All right, well, let's go through N1, 2, 6 through 17. Would someone like to move approval?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Okay, that carries. All right, 3. Barbara?
And it's just kind of a philosophical question. And it has to do with every year we do these consolidated applications. And we've been doing them as long as I've been here. And I don't know when they're due exactly, Susan. Is it soon? Is it March or April or something?
Yes, I believe it's actually February 1st.
February
for Con-App
1st.
Part 2.
Okay, so very soon. Okay, and my thought is this, is when we get the consolidated application, this is categorical funds that are coming from the federal government for us to spend on programs that we wish to spend it on. But in all the years I've been on the board, we've never really had a conversation as a board about how we spend the money. It's what happens is an administrative decision is made. I don't know how it's made. I don't know if you get a group of people together and they decide how the money should be spent or something. But the board's never really been given an opportunity to weigh in. And if this were a different financial situation in the state, I probably wouldn't even raise the issue, because we're talking, what, $2 million approximately? But it seems to me that we're in a situation now where we really have to look at every penny, and I understand we can't use it to supplant programs. I understand that, but it just seems to me, and I just wanted to throw this out to the board, maybe for the board members to think about. Do you think you might want to be a part of the process in determining how the money should be spent, because basically we're rubber stamping. This is coming, it's a completed application, and it's going to be sent off to the federal government. But in all my time here, again, the board's never been part of that process of determining how to use the money. And I was just wondering, does anyone have any strong feelings one way or the other? Or is it something you'd like to think about? Obviously, we're going to have to approve this. There's a deadline coming up, but maybe going forward.
Maybe we can pick these off one at a time so you can understand, like, the rules related, for instance, starting with Title I. What are the rules related to Title I, and, you know, what are the restrictions with it? Maybe we can, as we go through this process this year, Barbara, we can explain that, and then as we get closer next year, then you can give your input with it. So.
Right. I just would like the board to be aware of whenever you go through your planning. You know, let us be aware of how, whatever you're doing, and that those board members who are interested maybe might. Sure. You know, I know we've got 2 curriculum experts sitting on the board, and they probably would want to be very much involved. But it just seems to me I would just feel more comfortable with the whole process. Okay. And that's the reason that I pulled it. So could we put that in the minutes,
Yeah.
Gianna? The board will be told when the process is for planning.
And actually, as part of that, we can follow up with, here's what, and I'm just using Title I as an example, here's the restrictions on it, these are the regulations.
Oh, I know,
Yeah,
there's
and so-
restrictions, I know there's regulations, I know there's, you know, there's all sorts of things, but it just comes to us as a package with the bow on it, and we just put the postage on and send it on its way, and I just thought maybe as a board, we'd like to be a little bit more involved. That's my only thought.
It's listed as large amounts of sums of money in different boxes.
Right.
And we could provide you too, although the decision has been made as to the line item, to where that money's going. You know, that can be broken out for you by Amber, and we could provide you in an update, that kind of information, so you see this year at least where it is, and then also the process.
Right, but again, board members might have a different point of view as
Right,
to where
sure.
they think, you know, we look at things differently, and then we talk to our curriculum experts who have their opinion, and I just thought it would just be a better way to do it.
Well, perhaps in another meeting or two, whenever it's possible, come back not so much with the explanation that we just discussed, but give us a time frame. Like, you know, in April, we'll come and do this explanation. In August, we'll do this, and, you know, just give us a little timeline of how you plan to incorporate us in the process.
Right, and I just want to make it clear, this has been going on ever since I got on the board, and that's 13 years. This is the way we've always done it. This isn't a new way of doing things, but I just thought maybe at this point it would be time to kind of get some board input into it. And it may not make one bit of difference with the end result, but at least as a board member, we might feel better about how the money's being spent. So with that, I'd like to move for approval.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Okay, that carries, all right. And 4, Barbara?
Well, I don't know, Malcolm, you said you were interested in 4.
You go first.
Okay. Well, my question about 4 is really kind of the same kind of question about 3, which is there's a grant that's come forward from the Hartley Family Foundation. It's a lovely donation to the district, and a decision's been made already as to how to spend the money. And again, you know, no input from the board. And again, I would just like to be part of I'd like the board to have an opportunity to be part of the process, to understand how you made the decision to do what you did. And it's, well, that's really all I want to say about it.
Well, I had 2 things. Number one, this isn't the first time the Hartley Foundation has, I wanted to point that out. They've been so supportive.
Very generous, yeah.
When I was with the foundation, they're so supportive, and it's terrific. Mine was a second question. Was it this is what we can spend it on, or was it a directed gift of you will spend it on this? I was just curious about that.
I think it was a directed gift toward a certain purpose of professional development, and the opinion was asked if the donor had one idea, and they did ask for input about what kind of professional development is most critical right now at this particular level. So that question was answered, and then the gift was given with this purpose attached to it. But I appreciate what you're saying, and we certainly could, in the process of discussing things like that, include the board for direction.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's just along with what Barbara and Malcolm are saying, when we've got a $5 million hole to fill, and granted, this is, $10,000, which is very generous, it's more the idea of where we're best. Is this the best place to seek funding for when we have these tremendous needs? So I just think we need to this is just how we've always done it, which is how we've done it because it's worked and it's been great, but we're in really challenging times right now, so we need to change probably the way we do things a little bit. Okay.
I move approval of, which one was that?
4.
Of
Second.
consent item 4.
N4, yeah.
N4.
Okay, it's been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed say no. Okay.
I want to also say thank you very much to the Hartley Family Foundation for donating the money. I'm very appreciative. And I'm just hoping maybe we can do things a little bit differently in the future. Put that in there.
All right, let's move on then to item O, information, and O1 is review of board action related to the Palos Verdes Peninsula High School Stadium Lights Steering Committee project. Walker.
Because we've been having some questions about, obviously, this matter, I thought I would just go back quickly and review that the only action the board's taken goes back to, and I'm looking at the date, back to their July 26th, do I have the date right? Board meeting. And basically what they did was give permission, you as a board gave permission to the Stadium Lights Committee to raise money for planning stages. And that at nowhere in this process, and I think there's somewhere some confusion with it, as the board voted to give final approval to this project. And so there were packages back there, Jana, that I laid out in terms of, what the action the board took on the date they took it. We obviously had a lot of speakers here on that evening and expressed both pro and con on it. There's a copy of the policy that's attached with it, but at this point in time, the board's only taken one action, and that's to allow them to raise money for planning purposes, to put plans together, plans that will be approved over time, but finally the decision still is a board decision whether or not the project can go forward. So I think this is more just for information item to let people know that, and I think there are people here this evening that I think want to speak to it, but that's where we are as a school district.
And even, as you mentioned, it's an information item. We cannot take any, we're not going to take.
This is not for action
No action,
purposes,
right,
right, no.
simply just
This is just an information item.
Right. Any questions from board members first before I take the cards or call the cards? Okay, I have a few cards, so I'll call them in the order that I have them here. First, Sam Josephson. And if you could limit your remarks to 3 minutes, there will be a timer that'll go off. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is Sam Josephson, and I am a member of the Peninsula Preservation Committee. In June and July of 2010, the school board was given a presentation by the Pro-Lights Group, which included a letter from Michelle McKinney, General Manager of the Peninsula Shopping Center. In the presentation, it was stated that the overflow from the high school could park at Peninsula Center. In all fairness to Ms. McKinney, she did state in her letter to you that parking at the center was conditional on tenant requirements, and as it turned out, there were also contractual requirements between the tenants and the landlord that might have been violated had school parking been allowed. In the email you received from Ms. McKinney, you are now aware that she can no longer support or offer overflow parking at Peninsula Center. Yesterday, I spoke to Nicole Jules, Public Works Department, City of Rancho Palos Verdes. Next month, February, a letter will go out to all current and newly approved permit parking residents. The letter will inform them that the cost of permit parking decals will now be $2.50, which is a huge reduction. Rancho Palos Verdes has now made it affordable for more neighborhoods to establish permit parking streets. Now, if you can't park at the center and you can't park in the surrounding neighborhoods, where will you park? What you will have is an environmental traffic nightmare. Cars driving back and forth trying to find parking spaces, fans walking all over the streets trying to get to the stadium, and what about the residents just trying to get home? One of them might be you. How many security guards or sheriffs will you need to hire to keep the cars out of Peninsula Center? I just mentally counted 8 different entrances. Does that mean you need a sheriff at each entrance? How many will you need to keep them out of the neighborhoods? How many will you need just to direct traffic? How will you pay for them? Now, I believe, had you known that parking would not be allowed at Peninsula Center, it might have affected your decision to grant fundraising last July. In June of that year, you were told that everyone knew about the stadium lights. I believe one of the board members asked that question, and you were told everybody knew about them and very few residents opposed them. Well, as it stands today, there are hundreds of residents in Rancho Palos Verdes, Rolling Hills Estates, and even some in Palos Verdes Estates who oppose the installation of lights at the high school. I think we might have a few of them tonight. Will you folks just raise your hands? Thank you. You, the Palos Verdes School Board, are our elected officials. We, the residents, are your constituency. You need to hear us, you need to talk to us, and you need to take us seriously. Thank you.
Thank you. David D.
I wouldn't be second. My name is actually Dave DiVincenzi, and I've lived in this area for 31 years, and many of you I know personally. I live right below the school, and I just was looking at this list here, and it was really interesting how many people from Rolling Hills Estates were on this list, and as I looked, there were only 2, and one of them was a football coach, and the other one was a parent of a football player. So apparently, unless I'm missing it, we didn't hear the news. I represent a whole bunch of people on my street. In fact, everybody there are very opposed to it. We live right below it. What I hear, and what you may not hear, and I don't know where all you folks live, but in several of my rooms, I hear your noise. I hear the Friday day games. And it's been there. I let it go. It's not a big thing. I've been sick for 6 months, laying in bed listening to all the noise. And one of the things that really bothers me is your Saturday activities you have up there. I do hope somebody takes the time and look at that announcer up there. It tends to be a teenage person. You can hear almost every word he says. The lights. My kids went to the school, and I'm standing up here, and believe me, if there's any Booster Club people here, I've supported you, I've been with you for many years, and I don't want to be against you. Last time I spoke was 10 years ago. And when I did, several of them met me out in the parking lot, and they weren't too happy, and they threatened me. I didn't know whether they called the police or what. And then my kids at school were threatened by the football players. I had to pull the coaches together and ask them, please, to stop that. It's a very strong group, and it does create fear. And let me just touch on the point of fear. You guys all know the world is changing out there. I've worked for a large company. We pulled every single piece of a company and person out of the state. I don't know where you think the money's going to come from in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, but the business community is moving out of here big time. So our money situation for you guys is going to be very scary. Here we are, wanting to raise $500,000, wanting for not for a need, but a want, to raise money for lights. How does that look to the rest of the communities out there who are trying to keep teachers? I saw all your teachers here. They're going to say, you're raising $500,000 out of your community to help put up lights that the community doesn't want surrounding it? Let me just touch real quickly on gangs. Gangs are real. We ran into them at Peninsula High School. It doesn't seem like there are. And when you think there isn't drugs at our school, we all know there are. One of my business associates in Ecuador said, I don't need a passport to come to the United States. I can drive through one of your tunnels underneath the border. You just get in your car and drive under there. There's so much stuff out there, it's unbelievable. And your kids in our school are using them. The gangs. The people that we ran into at Peninsula were associated with the Lennox gang. Am I up? My time up?
Mm-hmm. You could wrap it up. Go ahead.
Okay, well, finally, the gangs are real out there. They're all over the place. And just picture this. At night, as you drive down Silver Spur and you look at that beautiful scenery, it's spectacular. There's nowhere like it on earth. Now picture all those gangs down there looking up at our dark hill. Now put a big giant light up there. What do you think they're going to think? gangbangers at night. They're going to think something different, and they're going to have different minds, and they're going to create crime for our people. So that being said, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mark Sturgeon?
Excuse me. Good evening, and President De La Rosa, members of the school board, and district staff. I'm Mark Sturgeon. I'm a member of the Peninsula Preservation Committee, and I'm opposed to the lights. For those of you who are not familiar with the Peninsula Preservation Committee, we're a grassroots organization that, if you want to say we're here to oppose the lights, that would be an accurate assessment. Right now we have 20 active committee members and a mailing list of several hundred supporters that's growing daily. Tonight, I would like to remind the school board that the schools belong to the community. The community is your constituent. We are your constituents, no matter how gray or bald we may appear.
Join the crowd.
Following forms in the rear, okay?
There's been a long tradition of a neighborly relationship between the schools and the community. I would not want to see that relationship change over this one issue. All we're looking to do is preserve our homes and preserve our ability to enjoy our homes. When the sun goes down, we want peace and quiet. When the sun goes down, we want to be able to look up and see stars and look out and see our nighttime views. If the City of Torrance, City of Redondo Beach want to turn on their bright lights and invite a large crowd, that's their prerogative. We don't have to be like Torrance and Redondo Beach. The character of our community is in a lot impacted by the lack of street lighting. Most of the community is dark at night. The City of Palos Verdes Estates is so adamant on that issue, they've even refused to install a single traffic signal. And finally, I'm looking forward to the day when members of my committee can meet with you individually outside of the boardroom in a less formal setting and have a real conversation about this issue. Thank you.
Kel Rhodes?
Good evening. I'm also a member of the Peninsula Preservation Committee. As you've heard, we do have hundreds of supporters across the peninsula, from all across the peninsula, not just from surrounding the school. And they value the same things that we do, and that is a quiet, semi-rural environment on the hill. And our group is continuing to grow over time. I would like to comment on one of the arguments that the Lights Committee has used, and that is that all other high schools have lights. Well, first, not all other high schools do have lights, but more important, conformity isn't a compelling reason to add them. People in this community moved here because it is not like other parts of Los Angeles. To drive around through our neighborhoods, it's hard to believe that we're as close to Los Angeles as we actually are. This is a valuable and unique characteristic of our community, and it deserves preservation. The people who live here enjoy the quiet residential atmosphere in which we live. If the lights were to be installed, I'm confident there would be a continual ramping up of their usage. Despite the best intentions of the promoters, it would be almost impossible to control the usage over the long term. What happens when other sports teams want to use them? The argument will be, well, why should the boys football team be the only ones who get to use the lights? Or, our school doesn't have lights, can't we use yours? I doubt other groups will be denied for long under the justification of fairness. It's not hard to see how, a few years down the road, that the lights will be in regular use. Look, I know that these are financially tough times, but they're hard for everybody, not just your district. They're hard for a lot of us, too. It's painful to hear that anybody is having to lose income. I can relate. I think mine has gone down a good 50%. If the lights are installed and used frequently, the surrounding community is then forced to deal not only with the inconveniences of increased noise and traffic, but also the significant decrease in home values that we can ill afford at this time. We thank you for your recent letter assuring us of an open and transparent process. We are looking forward to hearing more about this because we have lots of questions. What's the nature of the EIR that will be done? How will it be funded? Will you be using your city's planning department, which would have everyone's best interests at heart, or will you be hiring private consultants to do it? Answer only to you. Do you have the plans completed for the project yet? What is the form in which we'll be able to review the plans? We hope that these and other questions will be addressed. Now, this has been said many times before, but please note that those of us who do not support the Lights project nevertheless do support our schools. We are grateful for your service, which we know is not always easy, and we are happy to support the schools because this is our district as well. That said, we believe that the school district has an obligation to preserve the values of the communities it serves. 3 out of 4 cities on the peninsula are dark at night, and that's not by accident. It's a choice. We choose this lifestyle, and we hope that you as a fellow neighbor will honor that choice. Thanks.
Thank you. Earl Bites.
You probably saw me a little earlier. I'm wearing 2 hats tonight. First one was a photographer. Now I want to speak primarily against the lights on the hill. I recently sent you folks a memo expressing my concerns about the Friday Night Light project. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to read it. The issues here are the same as those in the recent Marymount referendum. A group of individuals forcing their interests on others who will bear the brunt of glaring lights, excessive noise, and declining property values. Many of us are concerned about these issues. I live less than a half mile from the school, and I can tell you that the existing noise level from the athletic events is considerable. Not just the noise coming from the amplified voice of an announcer, but from the band and those attending the game as well. A new amplifying system will not rectify this problem. Athletics are an important part of school life, but scheduling late-night games will not enrich the high school experiences of our kids. But I can tell you that the noise level and the 8-story tall lights will significantly impact the lives of many of us living in the area. You indicate that you are in a fact-finding stage of this project and that you intend to do an EIR before making a final decision. But it doesn't take rocket science to determine that the noise levels are excessive. Had you driven through the local neighborhoods last fall, you would know that the noise was a problem and that you still would not be considering this project at this time. My second point, the lights and noise from the late night games will impact the valuations of our homes. All residents selling their homes are required to disclose the impact of noise from late night athletic events. Clearly, the value of our homes will be impacted. Will our economic loss be 5%, perhaps 10%? This is a $50,000 to $100,000 hit. Should we willingly accept these losses so that the school can conduct late-night events? Would the district be willing to compensate us for these losses? I'd like to make one final point. This is a very slippery slope. Allowing the Peninsula High to erect lights and hold events late into the night sets a dangerous precedent. What school will want lights on its athletic field next? Palos Verdes, Merrill Est, or will the Peninsula School be eligible to hold late-night events at the campus for the remaining schools on the peninsula? Board members, you need to reconsider what you started. You're not bringing the community and the school closer together, but are increasing the divisiveness within our community. This project has pitted nearby homeowners against the board and the school, a school that we've taken great pride in, but is now becoming a symbol of antagonism and insensitivity toward its neighbors. Please stop spending valuable resources and time and end this project. I, for one, would not be in favor of supporting this project, and I hope you would agree with me. And I have to say, some of you have expressed your concerns about where the money's going. And I have respect for Barbara, who started to question about, well, where are our priorities? And I think this is something that's very important that you consider now. What kind of a message are we sending to our kids and the people within the Peninsula High School who are running around with T-shirts and trying to raise funds for putting up $500,000 worth of lights at that school, when in fact the district is facing $5 million in losses, possible cutbacks and other things for the staff. I'm asking you, take another look at your priorities, Board.
Okay, thank you. That was the last card I had. Any other questions or comments, members of the board? No? Okay, again, it's not on for any sort of action. It was just a restatement of the prior action. So we will move on. Anything else, Walker?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. We're going to move on then to item 02, the Williams Uniform Complaint Report.
Regular
just for-
report to the
right,
LACO.
just for information report. Any questions? No? Okay. Item 03, the sale and/or disposal of surplus property, on there as an information item. No comments, questions? Okay, we will move on. Is there another card? Okay. Okay, thank you. Let's see, let's go on to reports of board members. Barbara, would you like to give the report for the Southern California Regional Occupation Center?
I know.
You are a representative.
I know everyone's just dying to hear this report. But anyway, I guess the biggest thing that's happened recently is that a letter has been sent from, we now call it SoCal Rock, to Centinela Valley, because approximately a year ago, they indicated that they wanted to pull out of SoCal Rock, and they just said that was their intention, but they haven't taken a final action yet. So we sent them a letter asking them whether they were going to take a final action, and if so, we expected it to happen at an agendized board meeting. And we also informed them that it had certain financial obligations that it owed to SoCal Rock. So anyway, that letter has been sent, and we're just waiting to hear what, what their response is going to be.
And I got a copy today, so we'll put it out in your update so you can see the letter. See, Christine Hoffman sent it to us today.
So that's pretty much the biggest news at SoCal Rock right now.
Okay. Tony, any report?
I don't really have a report, but I do think I think I'm always the one that's kind of trying to bring stuff up that's going on off the Hill. And I do think it's interesting, and this is kind of me just thinking out loud after hearing Bill and Walker's presentation earlier about the timelines we have and kind of the processes, help me out. One or the other, thank you.
We know what you mean.
By which we go through and actually lay off teachers and hire them or rehire them. And I think it's very important to note that there's some extreme conversation going on both at the local and at the state level and national level about how we gauge teacher effectiveness and a series of task forces that are currently convening. And it's not necessarily something I think that is going to impact anything within the next year or so, but I definitely think within the next couple of years, that timeline and that process may look very different because of these conversations that are happening. And I think it's important that both we as a board and the faculty and the schools are starting a dialogue to really talk about what that might look like. So, I mean, we were already seeing some legal action right now in some very specific areas, but I think it's important that we keep that dialogue going while we're still struggling with all the financial issues, because it's coming and we don't know what it's going to look like, but clearly something's happening and something's going to be going on. How we measure teacher effectiveness, how we lay people off, how we hire them, how we possibly compensate them for their performance. So I just, it's not, when I started on the board, these were conversations that were kind of out there. Well, now they're much closer, and I think they're going to directly impact the decisions we make within the next year or two. So I wanted to share that because they're happening. Sure.
Just comment on that for just a second, because it was interesting. We had, these conversations are taking place, I agree. Pat Marisich, who is the BITSA coordinator for us, came to our principals meeting, or management meeting actually, and distributed the updated versions of California standards for the teaching profession. And we asked her to also comment on this issue of teacher effectiveness, and that we're all hearing about value added, that whole thing in the teacher evaluation process. And she was able to bring us, and it will continue to feed us some information about that. But you're right, the conversations which used to be in the back corners, are now
Sure.
right front and center. you know.
And before, I think, like many of the conversations we're having now around charter schools and some other things, it was, what might it look, should we or shouldn't we? And then very clearly that slope went to, no, they're here, so now what do we do? My sense is the conversation is not yes or no, it's yes, we need something. So now the real dialogue is about what that might look like and how to do it most effectively.
And indeed, there's a lawsuit pending, and probably several lawsuits pending that can impact the legal requirements and
Well, and some aren't even pending. I mean, the decision has been
Settlements,
granted
right,
that, you can't do this in certain situations. Now, they may not be the same communities or situations that we're in Palos Verdes, but I'm more trying to bring up the point that there's a larger conversation going on and dialogue that I don't think it's going away.
But that may force a change in state law that
Sure.
we perhaps would want to discuss it even in advance and be ahead of it.
That's exactly my point.
Right.
I really think it's important that we are not, and I think I've used the train analogy before, that we're leading the train, not at the back end of it. And, it's hard to have those conversations right now as we're operating under certain legal requirements, especially how we lay people off or how we have to do cuts. But we may have to figure out a way how we can engage in two dialogues going on that don't necessarily seem to be working together. But I do think one of the things I'm hearing right now is that those conversations seem to be much more dialogic rather than being forced upon. That I think even many faculty members and many individuals everybody wants a voice, and they want to make sure that this is done properly and not top down or not, even bottom up without any sort of looking at, as we know, research-based, evidence-based, empirically based, you name the based, we're on it right now. But I just want to bring it up as something that's because of those decisions that are coming out in the public and the news and I don't have any answers on how, but I think it's important that we start.
I don't know what the significance is now that Michelle Rhee lives in Sacramento and has the very attentive ear of the mayor of Sacramento.
No, she announced that she's done. She's not going to be involved in.
Oh, she's not going to be involved?
So when she left Washington, D.C., she said, I'm done.
But it's going to be interesting. Jerry Brown's an interesting guy, and he's an interesting guy. And so I don't know if there's a lot of what's going to happen, but her organization is certainly growing, and I guess it's going to be based in Sacramento now that she's domiciled there, and who knows?
Okay, thanks, Tony. Barbara, anything else? No. Then Malcolm, report, anything?
Nothing. I had a upbeat meeting yes, one thing. I had an upbeat meeting at Peninsula High School today regarding the pool project, and that's, please drive by Silver Spur and Hawthorne. There's a very sweet sign out in front that the Prindles are honoring their deceased daughter and their gift to the pool, and they seem to be upbeat. We're still not yet at the first anniversary of her death, but this is a good thing all around. It's a lot of win-win stuff going on. So it was a nice meeting to be at today.
All right, Larry?
I just wanted to acknowledge Palos Verdes AYSO Region 10, who had their annual dinner a couple weeks ago, and I attended, and they very generously gave us a check for $20,000 to be used any way we see fit. So I wanted to thank soccer. They're always a very good supporter of the school district, and they recognize the fact that we provide them with most of their fields and give them a lot of support. So a shout out to AYSO. That's it.
Thank you, and thank you for attending and representing us. And finally, I just wanted to announce that the Peninsula High School Arts Gala is January 29th at 6 p.m. Anything else? Anybody have anything else?
I have one thing.
Sure.
We need a capital campaign for our broken clock in the back. It is not, I've been looking at it and I said, my gosh, this meeting, the time has just stood still. And then I realized
It literally is.
either the clock are dead or I am. But it is not 7:45. I know Tony was just so jacked over here that, my gosh. So anyway. FYI.
Okay, thank you, because I'm not going to cite that clock. All right, so we're going to recess back to closed session at 9:01.